This session is a two-part presentation. Part 1 is Network Design, presented by Dina Villano of US EPA Region 9. Part 2 is a transition between filter-based FRM to continuous FEM, presented by Monica Stant of Shasta County AQMD.
Hi, I'm Dina Villano from EPA Region 9. I'm on the monitoring team in the Air Quality Analysis Office, and today I'm going to talk about network design. Designing an air quality monitoring network takes very careful planning and consideration of many important factors. Even a well-planned and maintained network can experience unexpected challenges and obstacles. And this past couple years especially included several unprecedented challenges. So what goes into designing and establishing a robust air monitoring network? And what things should you consider, and what challenges may you face in managing an air monitoring network that meets the needs of multiple stakeholders with often limited resources? California has one of the largest state air monitoring networks in the country and is made up of several diverse monitoring organizations, both large and small. And a map on the right of the PM 2.5 regulatory network in California highlights this fact. Today, I'm going to cover several topics related to network design that I hope will guide you through making decisions for designing and maintaining your own respective networks, whatever size and scope they may be. I'm going to talk about balancing resources and priorities, federal requirements, including annual network plans and network assessments, minimum monitoring requirements, new requirements like PAMs, system modifications, method changes, and ending on emerging challenges and innovations. Networks have to address several dynamic needs from multiple stakeholders, and it is often a difficult balancing act between meeting those priorities under those limited resources. Some competing priorities include meeting federal and state regulatory requirements, utility of multi-pollutant and long-term measurements, money and resources, informational and emergency monitoring, and community and public health monitoring requests. There are several federal monitoring requirements that I'm sure you are all aware of and should consider when designing a network. 40 CFR Part 58, Ambient Air Quality Surveillance, lays out the requirements for measuring ambient air quality and for reporting ambient air quality data and related information. I'd like to highlight a few specific sections of Part 58, including Appendix D, which covers the network design criteria to be applied in establishing your air monitoring network. Appendix E, which covers specific location criteria for probe and monitor path siting for designing and operating a network. And finally, 40 CFR 5810, which covers the annual monitoring network plans and network assessments, which I'll talk about in a little more detail. So to talk a bit more about the annual network plans, or ANPs, and network assessments, the ANPs are due July 1st of each year, and they require coordination and communication between monitoring agencies, EPA, and the public. They're a great tool for checking in on your network on an annual basis, and they include current site lists, photographs, satellite maps, our EPA approval letters, details about any network changes, public and EPA comments, and data analyses. EPA posts all the final plans online, and I encourage you to check them out and see how they vary across organizations and maybe get some inspiration for your plans. Network assessments are required every 5 years, and they have less requirements. There's a lot more freedom to design and implement an assessment according to your needs, and it's a very long-term, forward-looking document compared to the ANPs. EPA Region 9 has a detailed ANP checklist that we review to confirm your network is meeting the federal monitoring requirements. And during our review, we look at several aspects of your monitoring program. And these include the minimum CFR network requirements, system modifications like monitor site shutdowns, new sites and relocations, sampling frequency changes, continuous PM 2.5 FEM monitors, and making sure the reporting is NAAQS compliant, the SO2 data requirements rule, the NO2 monitor regs representing susceptible and vulnerable populations, and PAMs, among other requirements. Now I'd like to cover the minimum monitoring requirements in Appendix D in a bit more detail. In your annual network plans, you must confirm that you're meeting the minimum monitoring requirements for each individual criteria pollutant or your monitoring network, so NCORE near road, for example. Minimum monitoring requirements apply to a metropolitan or core-based statistical area, and they rely on several factors, including population and air pollution concentration data. And the example table here shows the PM10 minimum monitoring requirements table for an MSA with varying population levels and design value concentrations. Using this information, let's figure out the minimum monitoring PM10 requirements for the Oxnard Thousand Oaks Ventura MSA. The population is about 840K. They had a high concentration of 200 micrograms per meter cubed, which exceeds the NAAQS by over 20%. And so how many monitors are required? Based on the information in the table, it's looking like 4 to 8. And as many of you know, we have been suggesting including a footnote in your ANPs if your minimum monitoring requirements are likely being impacted by air quality events like wildfires. Overall, the quality of a monitoring network is often more important than the quantity of monitors that you deploy. But why do you sometimes need more than the minimum number of monitors for a given pollutant or network? There are several factors that may necessitate operating more than the minimum required number of monitoring sites in a network, and that includes planning actions, perhaps sites required by state implementation plans or SIPs, community needs, emergency monitoring needs, and other federal requirements such as sensitive populations, highest concentration sites, background and transport sites, co-location requirements for PM monitors, continuous monitoring requirements, and regional administrators' discretion. I also wanted to note the enhanced ozone monitoring requirements in 40 CFR Part 58 Appendix D, Section 5. These revisions include changes to the photochemical assessment monitoring stations or PAMS requirements, and they include enhanced monitoring plans to better understand ozone formation through enhanced ozone and ozone precursor monitoring. And just one important note is the PAM site implementation timeline had an original due date of 2019, June 1st, 2019, and there was an extension until June 1st, 2021. So this timeline is relevant for network design for several of our Region 9 agencies. Okay, so you're ready to make a network change, and network changes could span the range from replacing a single instrument at a site to replacing, relocating, and establishing an entire monitoring station. Reasons for this change could include aging equipment, changes in sampling frequency requirements, population changes, your lease ends, and shelter damage, but hopefully not the latter picture. So what needs to be considered before making a system modification? If you're about to embark on such a change, there are several things to consider, including your motivation, the resources or support needed for this change, data considerations, minimum monitoring requirements, co-location requirements, especially for PM 2.5, training for new instrumentation, EPA approval required, and also CARB notification and collaboration. So reach out to your PQAO liaisons if you're considering this type of change. If you're considering a major network change for an entire monitoring station, what are some things to consider? For example, how do you know when to discontinue a monitor or site versus relocate it? Some questions to ask include the following: attainment or maintenance plan requirements, the probability of exceeding 80% of the NAAQS in the next 3 years. Are there any Appendix D requirements that are relevant? Is it a max concentration site? Are there any minimum monitoring requirements? Any co-location requirements? And what's the attainment status look like in the last 5 years? And these are all things that we in Region 9 review when we are going over a discontinuation or relocation request. If considering a method change, what are some things to think about? For example, a monitor method change from a PM 2.5 FRM to an FEM. Unlike a monitor or site discontinuation and relocation, this change does not require formal EPA approval, although please note these changes in your annual network plan each year. You should also consider if there are any PQAO, PM 2.5 co-location requirements at play and coordinate with your CARB PQAO liaison. If so, thinking about what kind of training would be necessary on any new equipment, what QA documentation needs to be in place, so checking in on updates to SOPs or QAPs, what data validation process updates may result, and if there are any 103 grant funding impacts if you are a 103 agency. Finally, I'd like to recommend that you tune in to Monica Stant's presentation immediately after this one, and she's going to provide a district perspective on undertaking this type of network change. Finally, I'd like to touch on some emerging challenges and innovations that can impact the network design process. We have all experienced an unprecedented and challenging few years in several aspects, and I think Region 9 has been unique in the scope and magnitude of some of these challenges. And they have included wildfire smoke monitoring, community monitoring, AB 617 monitoring, emergency response, COVID impacts, increase in exceptional events, and of course, resources and staff turnover. And I'm sure a lot of other challenges that I'm not including on this slide. And these challenges necessitated that many of you wear multiple hats in your roles and consider these factors in your network design. And I would just like to say, I feel like you've all done a commendable job and have risen to the occasion time and time again. It's really a testament to your passion and dedication to producing robust air monitoring data. There have also been many resulting innovations in network decision-making and balancing competing priorities related to network design in recent years, including a broad and sweeping transition to PM FEMs, especially across the CARB PQAO, increased automation for monitoring operations, expansion of non-regulatory sensor monitoring and data interpretation resources. For example, the figure on the right shows California's PM 2.5 sensor network in 2019. So all those dots are sensors, and I'm fairly certain if we looked at this map in current day, there would be a lot more dots for 2021. Also, improved public communication concerning wildfire sensors and other monitoring needs, network right fitting based on limited resources and evolving needs, and many more innovations that I do not have the space to list here. And our Region 9 monitoring organizations, you all, have been leaders in many of these monitoring achievements, setting a standard for agencies across the country. And it's something I hope you all can be proud of, even though we know there is much more work to be done. So with that, I will end my presentation, and my contact information is at the bottom of the slide if anybody would like to reach out. Thank you very much.
My name is Monica Stant, and I have been the primary site operator for the Redding and Anderson monitoring sites of the Shasta County Air Quality Management District for 2 years now. And I'm here to take you on a journey of our transition from a filter-based FRM to a continuous FEM as our primary PM 2.5 monitor at our Redding site. So, taking you along on this journey of transition, I hope to point out where we got lucky and where this process seemed easy for us. My hope is that it will help other districts anticipate what's involved in making this transition and anticipate any problems that could arise, many of which we probably didn't face because we did get pretty lucky. I'm going to start with where we were at in 2018, discuss why we needed to change, why we chose ABAM 1022, the acquisition and installation of that instrument, as well as the maintenance and data comparisons during the special purpose monitoring period, how it helped us with COVID-19, and I will tie it together with where we are at now in 2021. So, in 2018, we had 2 PM 2.5 instruments. At our Redding site, we had our filter-based FRM, a RMP Partizol 2000, which hereafter I'll just refer to as the RMP. It ran on a 1 in 6 day sampling schedule, and it was pretty old. We were actually rebuilding it when we had to with spare parts from a previously retired RMP from years before. We had a continuous PM 2.5 monitor in Anderson, a BAM 1020. However, that version of the 1020 is so old, it's non-FEM. That data is not for record. We only use it for burn day determinations and as another source of public information. Why make this change in the first place? Well, if we have smoke for 3 days because of a small fire, our 1 in 6 day sampling schedule could totally miss it, not be reflected at all in our data. On top of that, we can't weigh our own PM 2.5 filters. We rely on Sacramento Sample Handling Lab, and it can take us 4 to 6 months to get that post-weigh data back. Now, we do have the Anderson 1020 for a continuous PM monitor. However, Reading has 9 times the population of Anderson and way more schools, and there can be visible differences in air quality between the two places. It didn't seem appropriate to not have a continuous FEM serving our population center. In addition, the RMP's really old. In 2019, when I was first being trained by Rob Stahl on site operation and maintenance, it had 3 data affecting malfunctions. Now, I thought it was great getting practice troubleshooting and taking it apart, putting it back together, but for Rob trying to teach me in 110-degree heat on a roof, it was not great. The real kick that made us prioritize making this change as fast as possible, though, was the Carr fire, which burned July through August in 2018. It started a few miles west of the city of Reading, burned nearly into the city itself and through multiple communities, and was a very traumatic event for communities in our district. And we only had the Anderson BAM to give up-to-date air quality information in very changeable conditions. So why did we pick a BAM 1022? Well, first of all, our fundamental need was a continuous PM 2.5 monitor, which it meets. It also doesn't have any shelter requirements, which is great for us. We didn't have to worry about putting a shelter for it on the roof of the Reading monitoring site or having to worry about an AC unit. We anticipated it would have similar operation and maintenance requirements as the BAM 1020, which we were already familiar with in Anderson. And frankly, we didn't know about the co-location requirements when we decided on a 1022. Fortunately, CARB has helped us out immensely, understanding those, meeting those requirements, and getting it all sorted out. And I encourage anyone else to contact CARB and work with them on figuring out co-location requirements before deciding on what instrument you're going with. Ultimately, I really like the 1022, and it's worked out great for us. Maybe other districts won't have the same luck we did. So when I hear other people describe changes they make to their monitoring, I often wonder, well, how much did that actually cost you? So I have put that cost out there for everyone to see. We did save a little money off the bottom line by reusing a PM10 inlet and a very sharp cut cyclone from another retired instrument. And we didn't pay for it. We heard about just-in-time EPA 103 grant funding distributed by CAPCOA, so we applied to CAPCOA, received the grant funding, and in November of 2018 we had our 1022. So Rob grabbed another inspector to help him carry it up to the roof at the Reading monitoring site, and we are very fortunate in that Shasta County owns the building the Reading monitoring site is on. So we were able to just plug it in at the outlet provided specifically for our PM instruments. Shasta County IT, who we work with regularly, had the Ethernet cable installed and made sure that we had the software to access the BAM 1022 menu and data from our office. Very easy. We were really lucky with those circumstances. In 2019, February, Rob performed the zero filter background test after making sure everything was reporting correctly, seemed to be working fine. And that point was the start of our special purposes monitoring period with the BAM 1022 co-locating with the RMP. So when we first got the 1022 on the roof of the Reading site, we didn't have an SOP. I was trained using the operation and maintenance manual provided by Met1 Instruments and occasionally referring to the BAM 1020 SOP. but we really didn't see any issues with that. It's only Rob and I who were training to use that equipment, and maintaining consistency between just the two of us was pretty easy. I could see a district considering this transition for multiple monitoring sites, perhaps having a little bit more difficulty with that aspect. The METO pump in the 1022 does seem to require a bit more frequent maintenance than the gas pump in the 1020. However, I'm not sure that the METO is exclusive to the 1022. And I haven't seen any more nozzle buildup on the shelterless 1022 as I have on the Anderson's BAM 1020. I've not had tape punctures with either instrument, so maybe that's not as helpful to other districts that have had tape puncture issues, but the 1022 has been very similar to the BAM 1020 in terms of maintenance, and for anyone who's familiar with the EBAMs for prescribed burn monitoring, it's almost exactly the same. So here's a comparison of the Reading and BAM 1022 data while they were co-located. The 1022 data is the 24-hour average over days that the RMP also ran. So as it's easy to see, the data trends very closely, though the BAM 1022 does tend to read a couple of micrograms per cubic meter lower than the RMP post-weigh data indicates. Looked at a linear correlation of the RMP and BAM 1022 data, and our correlation coefficient was 0.99, which of course gives us a lot of confidence that a linear relationship does exist and well describes the relationship between these data sets. The slope we got in our best fit line was 0.95, which, yeah, the BAM 1022 does underreport compared to the RMP, but we still have a lot of confidence in that data, and it's definitely worth having to have updated hourly information available for the public. So in winter of 2020, the sample handling lab was no longer able to provide our Reading site with pre-weighed PM 2.5 filters, but as other folks may recall, if a monitor is special purpose, after 2 years at the same site, it becomes SLAMs. So we were 3 months away from the BAM 1022 becoming SLAMs anyway, and we had already built up a lot of familiarity with operation and maintenance of the machine, and we were already confident in its data. So for us, the timing really was not too bad. In terms of data validation, it definitely takes a lot longer to go through and flag hourly continuous data than it does to fill out a chain of custody form once every 6 days. We do go through hourly ozone data, so we applied that same process when figuring out how we were going to evaluate the 1022 data before uploading it to AQS. We primarily flag times when the machine was undergoing maintenance or testing or when it was non-operational, and major weather and smoke events. We don't go through hour by hour looking to explain anomalies, and perhaps that's not the most rigorous data validation method, but it works for us with as few staff as we have. Only 3 of us in total in our district do anything with the monitoring. And it still only takes me several hours to evaluate and comb through and be sure to flag data from both our Anderson and Reading sites for Ozone and the BAM 1022. So it takes more time, definitely worth it for us, but for a district maybe with even fewer staff than we do, or a district with very rigorous data validation and documentation, that increase in time could be a significant factor in your decision. Our site visits weren't impacted as much. We still have a 1 in 6 day sampling PM10 high vol at the Reading site. So we still needed to visit the site regularly. However, we have more people trained who used to do monitoring on how to change out filters in the PM10 high vol than we do on operating the BAM 1022. So knowing how much filter tape is in the BAM 1022 and being able to monitor it from the office means you don't really have to visit the site very often. There were a couple of times we only visited for monthly maintenance, specifically addressing the 1022. So for other districts, you may see substantially more benefit from that aspect than we were able to get. And that brings us to today. We still have the RMP sampling on the Reading site. It is on a 1 in 12 day schedule now. And I will say, ever since summer of 2019, that thing has been bulletproof. It's almost like it saw a new person and was like, should I break and prank this guy? But it's still working and it's been operating solidly ever since. We have the BAM 1020 and the 1022, both providing information to the public, hourly updates on the air quality we're seeing, and an unexpected benefit is the BAM 1022 data is used by the air resource advisors when preparing their smoke outlooks. So that's been great too. This is my contact information. That is my direct phone line. If you have any questions we don't get to in the Q&A, feel free to reach out to me anytime. And I'm excited to discuss what other issues may come up in making this transition that other districts anticipate. And thank you all very much for your time.
Thank you all. We'll now enter the Q&A discussion. We have a few and we're a little short on time. The first one is for you, Monica, is if there is an advantage to using a BAM 1020 instead of a 1022?
Other districts already have approved SOPs that you can borrow from. Also, there might be more support. More people are familiar with those instruments. The 1022 is similar enough to the 1020 that I don't think that would be as big of an issue. But in terms of things in favor of the 1020, the approved SOP already existing from multiple other sources, I think is a big one.
Mm-hmm. And what were the results from your original BAM 1022 zero test?
So the background setting that we had to put in was negative 0.0011 with a standard deviation of 0.0022, which is the limit at which you should redo it is if the standard deviation exceeds 0.0024. So it's a little close on that. Apparently the 1022 does tend to have higher standard deviations during the zero filter background test.
All right, thanks, Monica. A question for Dina. Can you elaborate on how an agency should address minimum monitoring requirement in the AMP due to wildfire impact? Could the wildfire impact cause year-to-year variation in the PM10 and PM2.5 concentrations or network needs?
Yep, I can take that one. This is a very common question we're getting from everyone and that we're seeing on during our AMP reviews. So I think that the most important thing is your annual network plan should reflect the actual concentrations you're seeing, regardless of whether they're due to potential, say, exceptional events, wildfires, etc. And this is the same for dust. You know, this answers the same thing for any dust impacts or anything else like that. We want you to reflect those actual concentrations in your minimum monitoring requirements tables. So, we want you to put those concentrations in, and then how many monitors would then be required based on those concentrations. And what we've been recommending so far is that you at least or if you want, you can put a footnote in and say that these concentrations were likely impacted by wildfire, and whatever supplemental information you'd like to add as a footnote at the bottom of your tables. And then outside the annual network plan, I would suggest we can work together with districts depending on the situation and interest or need for establishing new monitoring. But right now, that's at least within the AMP requirement, making sure you have that accurate information in there, and then you're welcome to provide additional information about wildfire impacts as well. So that's what we've been recommending in general, but clearly this is an ongoing situation. So it's something that is a high priority for us to discuss here in Region 9 and alongside the impacted districts as well in the coming years.
All right, thank you, Dina. I'm afraid that's all the time we have for questions at the moment. Adolfo's presentation will be starting momentarily. Thank you, Monica and Dina, for joining us.